How does a guy from a hilltop in Afghanistan get to owning and growing an information technology company in Portland? What do people think of Maine on a national stage?
So there are people that know Maine and people who don't know Maine.
Hi, we'd like to welcome our listeners to the Boulos Beat broadcast. I'm your guest host today, Tony McDonald. I'm substituting for Greg Boulos, who is on assignment elsewhere. This is a series providing insight into Maine's real estate movers and shakers and business leaders. Today we're interviewing Josh Broder of Tilson Technology Management. Tilson's a Portland-based firm with a national presence. Their tagline is they are on a mission to build America's information infrastructure. They've been on the Inc. 5000 for 10 years consecutively. And Josh, can you tell us what it is Tilson does? I think I know, but you could tell our listeners better than I could.
Sure, Tony. Thanks for having me on. Tilson is on a mission to build America's information infrastructure, as you said. And information infrastructure to us means primarily the networks and information systems that help great organizations innovate and deliver what they do out to the world. And for us, that means deploying fiber and wireless networks for broadband providers, for cellular carriers, for public utilities modernizing their grids, for government agencies. We are on the hunt for large industrial network owners, and we build those systems. And when I say build them, I mean we really develop them. So we provide consulting services to help our clients build a conceptual plan. We provide professional and logical engineering of those networks. We have a civil engineering stamp in every state, and we construct those networks. And so embedded in our company is a construction company with guys in hard hats and muddy boots who go out and deploy these facilities. Because the way we interact with infrastructure is through our nice slick iPhone, but behind that nice slick iPhone is a big steel tower somewhere with a shelter at the bottom. It's fiber optic cable run for hundreds of miles along the side of the road, and we help bridge that sort of virtual world and the physical world of delivering that infrastructure.
It's got to be an enormous endeavor. It seems that the information infrastructure has become not just America's, but the world's superhighways these days. And you can't get anywhere without that signal.
Yeah, true story. I mean, the demand for data, whether it's mobile on our phones or at a desktop in our homes and businesses, increases in a way that's more than linear. It's incredible the voracious appetite we have for data. And increasingly, people have an expectation that data will be delivered at sort of frictionless speeds, meaning we don't perceive any lag between what we want and what we see. We want that to work everywhere, whether it's in a dark crevice of a building or out in a field. And so, our business has really been around helping those important network owners meet consumers' demands for that data wherever they want it.
So you've been with this company since 2006. Now the company existed, but in a very different form. And you were in the Army with the Signal Corps, served in Afghanistan, had a Bronze Star. Thank you. How does a guy from a hilltop in Afghanistan get to owning and growing an information technology company in Portland?
Well, for me, it came in pieces, and the first piece was just coming home. So I'd grown up in this area, and when I finished with the military, I was excited to come back to Maine and be close to my family. And so I came to Maine, and I wound up throwing in with a startup that had been founded by a guy by the name of Mike Dow, who was from Pittsfield, and he had just left a tour of duty himself as the CIO at Chimbro Construction, where he had been basically implementing big IT systems and networks for them. And he had founded this consultancy, Tilson, which was helping construction companies, but also others, name brands around Maine like Bangor Savings Bank and Jackson Labs, implement bigger IT to grow their operations. And so when I got back to Maine, he took a chance on a young guy who had no commercial experience, and he hired me. And I think I was the third guy in the company. And when we were in the sort of teens number of employees, he had an opportunity to go work for some of my old Army buddies in Switzerland, and I wound up buying the company at that time. There was some serendipity, but the foundation of it all was coming home to Maine and being back near my family and friends.
Maine's a great place to live if you can figure out how to make a living here.
It sure is, yeah.
It's great to hear stories about people that go out. I did the same thing, grew up in Maine, went out, worked with the Navy, came back and realized what a wonderful place Maine is. So there you are in Portland. The company has grown tremendously. As I mentioned, Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies. Just tremendous, tremendous growth by anybody's standards. So this may not be a fair question, but what's the chicken and what's the egg here? Did Portland, which you grew up here, as did I, is evolving quickly and changing. Was it the change that was going on here that allowed you to support a national, if not international, technology company here? Or is it companies like yours that are making this a community that has a national presence?
Yeah, it's a good question, Tony, and it's a little bit hard to answer in the sense that this chicken.
It's hard to ask.
Yeah, well, the chicken or egg thing is real. What I would say is there actually was a phasing here. Being in Maine was really helpful for us in the early days. What I mean by that is we got to try some things here and do some projects that we might not have been able to do had we been in Boston or New York or Los Angeles. And what I mean by that is when we were still a young company growing up and didn't have the track record and credibility that we have today, there were some projects that came down the pike, particularly during the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act time period. This was the last recession we had. Stimulus comes in, and stimulus came to every state, and they were big projects. And so we got to run some big projects as a little firm here in Maine that would have been much more competitive in some other markets. And so we were able to then parlay that experience nationally to say, hey, look, we built a 1,000-mile fiber network before, or we put 7,000 wireless devices on top of utility poles. We had done that in Maine for our friends and family, and then we were able to replicate that and sell that nationally. And so our story coming up here was important to be here. But when you think about it today, people say, well, why are you in Maine? And the answer is usually, well, I live here, and this is where we grew up.
Yeah.
But the work we do is, the percentage of our business today in Maine is, low single digits. It's mostly out of state.
Interesting. Do you find that when you take that Maine presence elsewhere, what do people think of Maine on a national stage?
Well, it's interesting. So there are people that know Maine and people who don't know Maine. And
Yep.
so the people that I run to, they say, oh yeah, they get this like wistful look in their eye. They say, when I was a kid, we used to go to Wells Beach every summer, and it was
Yeah.
the happiest days of my life. I'd love to get back there. I hand them a business card and say, come work for us.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of people that say, Maine, where is that? Why is your business there? Companies like you are based in Dallas or Atlanta, and that's it.
Yeah.
And so I don't understand why you're there. And so I have to break it down for them. But the pithy anecdote about that is I was doing some work for the Metropolitan Transit Authority of New York. So this is the guys who run the subway in New York City. And I go to a meeting, and it's a contentious meeting. It's a difficult issue. We're all wrestling with each other over some things. And we're at a break and having our coffee, and all these guys have a pretty heavy Long Island accents. And they say with that Long Island accent, which I won't try and replicate here, so what's your story, Mainer? And I say, well, they needed me for this project. It was the right fit. And, it's actually closer than you think. They said, well, Maine's about as far as we can imagine. I said, what time did you leave your house this morning to get here? And he said, well, about 6. And I said, well, I left mine at 6:30, and we were here at the same meeting. Because I get Portland Jetport working for me.
Yeah. Well, that kind of segues to a question I had. What's it like to run a national technology company from Maine? I have to think there's obviously the logistics, but we've got a pretty good airport.
Yeah.
You can get there from here.
Yeah, in my opinion, it's the best airport in the country.
Unbelievable airport. But you got to get people to come here too, and what's that like?
Well, so it's gotten easier over time for 2 reasons. One is we've been able to more easily attract people to come work for us here because of our national profile. And I think inherently the technology has improved to the point where people don't view being distant as a big disadvantage. In the early days, it was quite hard. We were the kind of folks who slugged it out 5 days a week on domestic short haul, and everything was a connection.
Yeah.
Well, everything's not a connection anymore. We got a lot of direct flights, and where I used to go for 2 or 3 weeks in the middle of the winter to one of our Southern Climb offices, camp out there and try and help accelerate the business. I can go there for 2 days now and do a lot of this stuff remotely. And so I think technology's made the distance less of a disadvantage. I think the airports made the distance less of a disadvantage because of our direct flights. And it's easier for us now knowing that we can attract top talent because of who we are than it was when we were scrapping for it. Always consistently though, the tipping point when we're trying to get a professional engineer to relocate from California is getting them into the office. If we can have them see our nice space, if we can have them have a nice meal at one of these great restaurants and see what's going on in the city, they just had no idea what was here. And so if we can get them here, we know we got them.
But it seems to me, while the pandemic is a horrible thing, and we'll never forget it, in a certain way, it has pointed out the importance of infrastructure, the information highway. And do you see that? I hate to take a disaster and call it an opportunity, but do you see that as an opportunity at all, an increased understanding nationally that we need to rebuild or build our infrastructure?
Yes, it's an easy answer, yes. The pandemic's been the hardest year of my life as a leader, and the hardest year in our business in terms of having to adapt. Our employees have lost spouses. COVID's been total chaos in the field. That being said, you do the best you can to find the green shoots and the silver linings in these kind of calamities. And one of those green shoots is that digitization, this idea that we can move things from physical to virtual, has progressed by 10 years in a year. And so I actually don't think this has changed the trajectory of our virtual life, but it has accelerated it. It's happened much faster. And there are people who didn't used to participate in the digital world who now do. Virtually everyone does. And things that were physical, we've been forced to find virtual solutions to protect our own safety. Those were things that were going to happen anyway and were happening, but it's gone much faster now. And so as a company who focuses on building and maintaining that infrastructure, on consulting on it, on providing due diligence services for mergers and acquisitions in it, all of this is caused incredible acceleration, which has been net positive for our business, even medium term. I mean, short term, it's been very challenging.
Sure.
But I consider us very grateful in that the challenge that I have is different than other CEOs I peer group with. They say, I don't know if I'm going to be in business next year. And I say, well, gosh, we've had to close 20 offices and people have been sick and it's been total chaos, but the underlying demand for what we do is actually accelerated.
And to that end, do you view the national infrastructure for information technology, I can't help but compare it to the highway system.
Mm-hmm.
Does this system need to be completely rebuilt, new roads laid out, or does it just need a new coat of pavement and some new striping, or?
It's something in between. The fundamental core infrastructure of the internet in the United States is excellent, but the ability to extend it to all the places it needs to go is pretty lousy. And you see that in places that are rural. You see that in places that are urban but have demographic segregation, where they have great networks in one neighborhood and not great networks in another. And so there is a tremendous amount of underinvestment, I think in the trillions of dollars kind of range, to be globally competitive and make sure we harness the creativity and potential of every American. And so Maine is one of those states that falls into the category of having lots and lots of work to do. And part of that is because we're at the end of the road, the end of the digital road also, right? Mm-hmm. Imagine that the fiber cables basically follow the roads. But also it's a rural state. And so connecting to people is really important. And one of the big trends of the pandemic has been city people have decided that it's safer and more advantageous to be rural people. And what they're bumping into is the limits of broadband in the communities that they'd like to relocate to. And I think that's a huge opportunity for Maine. Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit. I share your thoughts on that. It seems like Maine, Greater Portland, Maine in its entirety is kind of at a point where a lot of really interesting things might start happening here. And some people don't want that to happen, some people do, but I don't think you can really stop the tide. When the tide's coming in, you can just decide to float your boat or swim. What's the vibe you get nationally in your travels, or just what do you think about that? What do you see going on in Portland and this area?
So there's a few big trends and some reactions, and Portland is right in the middle of those trends, as is rural Maine. And so the first is the decoupling between work and home. And what I mean is that you don't have to be in a physical workplace to work in a lot of places now. Now that's not true universally. Like you can't be a plumber and do it over Zoom. And many of the jobs at Tilson actually have strong physicality. You have to be in the place where you're doing the work. But in the white collar side of our business, we have people that have lived near our offices who have moved to places where we don't have offices, and we could care less. We say like, live wherever you want and do the work that you do. And so I think there's an opportunity because of the quality of life and place that we have to be an attractive place for people to work remotely. And I think that benefits people who are here. They have access to really incredible career opportunities, and I think it's also helpful to attract people here. And we've seen that. Home prices are at a record high, and so what I hear as a reaction to a lot of that is fear that we will lose what we have, fear that if enough people come from away, this will be New Jersey. I'm not really worried about this becoming New Jersey. No offense to New Jersey. It's a great market. We have an office there.
Yeah.
But I'm actually not worried about it getting to that place. What I think is real is pressure on home prices. And so people are concerned that, as people are able to come here, that home prices will escalate. And so the natural reaction is, let's make it harder to be here, which I think is a huge mistake. And in some work that I recently did in the Economic Recovery Committee at the state level that was sort of trying to help respond to the derailment of the state's economic plan by the pandemic, one of the things we called out is that there needs to be some state policy to support people having affordable workforce housing in areas close to where they work. And this is a huge problem in Maine. Before the pandemic, the average commute was 45 minutes in Maine. Well, that's bad for workers because it's expensive. It's bad for the state because you have to maintain a lot of infrastructure. It's bad for the environment. Pick all the reasons why a 45-minute average commute is bad. And so dealing with that issue, which is now under increased stress by the pandemic, I think is really important. But dealing with that issue shouldn't preclude us from competing for knowledge workers to want to come live here. I think we can solve both problems, and the idea that we have to be defensive of the pie rather than grow the pie, is maybe not the right approach.
Tell us more about I'm not sure what it was called, the governor's panel on. Maybe you could explain that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So Governor Mills, in the early days of the pandemic, convened a group called the Governor's Economic Recovery Committee. It's a group of volunteer, non-politician participants, although they did invite some members of the legislature to join. But we were people from all parts of the economy. We were a bipartisan group from different opinions and backgrounds, nonprofits, government participants. And the idea was that we would do some planning in parallel to the emergency so that by the time the emergency was over, we would have a roadmap to how to get back on track with the economic plan. And if you can remember back to those really difficult days of April, March, June, when nobody really knew how this was going to go, everybody was running to the ball of the emergency room. And so I thought the governor was very prescient to look forward and say, we need to have some people thinking about the long-term recovery while everybody else is busy dealing with the emergency. And so that's what we did. We issued a couple of reports that provided both some, in the moment, some recommendations on how to provide some spending guidance around the big CARES Act funding that the state had received, and then more long-term, how to get back on track with the strategic plan.
Interesting. And are there recommendations that are being implemented, or where does that whole study and the results stand?
Yeah, so from the two tranches, the first recommendations were largely what I would call sustain and support Maine people. This is the idea that if we didn't provide something between now and the end of the pandemic and the beginning of the recovery, there'd be more of that, what they term permanent economic damage. So instead of businesses losing money, they'd be gone, and there'd be nobody to support. And so we recommended a number of supports for both businesses directly and for individuals to sort of get us through. And largely, I think we'd made about $1.2 billion of recommendations, and something like $900 million were implemented. Then later, we provided recommendations on how to get back on track with this strategic plan. And those measures have largely been either implemented or are under discussion at the legislative level. The most recent recommendation was the governor provided a back-to-work bond framework for the legislature to consider, and that draws many similarities back to our report. You can see that it really follows closely that blueprint.
Interesting. So you're in a unique position in that you have taken a very deep dive into what's going on in the state of Maine, yet you are also exposed to the national stage as well. With that viewpoint of seeing both, what do you see as opportunities for Maine over the next decade, let's say, or shorter or longer if you'd like, but over the next, not the next few months, the next several years? And what do you think are our most dangerous pitfalls that we have to be careful of? You mentioned the keep them out aspect. That's certainly not business friendly, but we'll talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so there's incredible opportunities in front of us. I mentioned before this idea of quality of place now being a competitive advantage in workforce recruitment. It used to be quality of place, quality of schmace. If you don't have jobs, people can't come. Now people can live wherever they want and work in many areas. So I think that's a real opportunity for Maine. I also think it's a threat. One of the things we think is that we are the only nice place to live in the country. And after doing a lot of traveling, it's clear that we aren't.
Yeah.
And so the door swings both ways. The decoupling of work and place means that we can go get a Facebook employee and put them anywhere in the state. It also means that a WEX employee doesn't have to be in Maine. And so I think there is some sense of we got to play offense and defense on that and compete at every level. I also think there's a big opportunity in fundamental research and graduate education. Maine has always punched above its weight in terms of its ability to educate at any level, particularly in the post-secondary education space. And we've seen some recent serious investments in the state and in particular in the Portland area, for example, the Rue Institute. And when I think about that being here in Maine, I think of it as a competitive advantage for my company to be able to recruit and retain people here and give them a great career. And so this week we're announcing publicly, you may be the first person to know here, we're announcing that we have 5 positions that are in cooperation with the Rue Institute, where 5 students will get a full scholarship to get a graduate degree in computer science, project management, or data analytics, and also a job at Tilson in that same time period, where they'll rotate through each of our major business areas with the idea that after coming through a rotational, paid job experience and getting their graduate degree, that they'll be on a leader track at Telson. And so
That's great.
when we think about what's available to us here today, we have several industrial clusters, in biotechnology and life sciences and artificial intelligence and technology. And we have now starting to be the seeds of the graduate and undergraduate education programs that will help businesses really view this place as a place to come get workforce, whether they're headquartered here or they're just working with a lot of people coming out of these tremendous institutions.
That's exciting stuff.
It's really exciting.
Yeah. So if you were talking with another entrepreneur who's maybe a few years behind you, and they're thinking of starting a business, what would you tell them about starting a business or perhaps relocating a business? Mm-hmm. They're going to do something with their business. What would you tell them about the possibility of doing it here?
So I tell them that Portland brings them a few advantages. One's that it has the level of cosmopolitanness that is necessary to maintain competitiveness anywhere in the country for the best people. And so that is necessary but not sufficient. And so when they think about their recruiting strategy and where they're going to be, they also need to think about what funding looks like. And oftentimes, while money theoretically flows to great projects wherever it is, the people who manage that money are often localized. And another thing that Portland has where it hits above its weight is access to capital. And so when we were a little company and we needed investment, we needed our first few institutional investors, they came from the area. And it's very accessible here relative to other places. The absolute number of dollars and funds are smaller, but the competition is less. And so I would say for a growing company, this is a great place to access a competitive workforce and have access to capital, which is really critical. And oftentimes it's hard to do that even today over Zoom. Some kind of interpersonal relationship is necessary with those funding sources.
Yeah. Maine's a small town, and you find people quickly. We kid around in our office that you can check anybody in the state of Maine out with 3 phone calls.
Yeah.
And find out who they are and what they're up to, and so I can see what you're saying. And people are accessible. So this is about business, but we are a real estate company. So let's talk about real estate for a minute. I worked with you several years ago to help you find your offices, and we looked at a number of places, and we ended up with brand new construction in the then nascently, if that's a word, growing eastern waterfront area. And I remember distinctly telling you at one point that, Josh, I think this is the most expensive option, but it might be the best one in the long run. But I don't feel good about telling you to go for the most expensive option. I think it all worked out. Tell us a little bit about growing up, if you will, in the eastern waterfront area as a company and the changes you've seen over there.
Sure. So when we
You were a pioneer at the time.
So when we entered the pandemic, we had 23 offices, and today we have 20, and the only office we own is in Portland. And when you had suggested new construction, it hadn't been something we considered at the time because of its expense. We were really focused on leasing up an existing space.
Right.
We were a little company then,
Right.
and it was a big step to try and enter new construction. And one of the things that was really helpful in our business relationship was, your invitation to sit down with another young developer, Nate Bateman, who had a vision for a place along with some other business partners to develop a new building as a part of the gateway to what was to become a hot neighborhood. And so I remember at the time that we did it, it felt like a big risk. Looking back on it, it seems totally obvious. The fact that we've emptied the offices for COVID notwithstanding, that location will stand us in good stead. We will continue to grow in that building for years to come. And the neighborhood that it's in is incredible and now part of our competitive advantage. So when we walk people around the office, when we're trying to woo that California engineer, they're looking around and seeing WEX and the site that's going to be Sun Life and the new Brutel going up and the Rue Institute, and they can imagine their spouse working in one of those places. Right. They can imagine themselves working in one of those places if it doesn't work out. And so it's important for me to be part of a cluster, not just from an industry cluster standpoint, but physically, where people can imagine themselves not just at Tilson, but at another place. I mean, the reality of people's careers is that they're portable and they make decisions. Nobody wants to move to the middle of nowhere where if it doesn't work out, they got to move again.
Right.
And so in this case, they look around and say, I've got the same opportunity here as anywhere else. And it's got nice restaurants and it's got a good vibe and there's a walking trail. Like I just couldn't be happier about what's happened in that neighborhood.
It's astounding. I'm from here, as are you, and I'm in the middle of the real estate world. But this was probably 9 months ago, I had like 45 minutes between appointments. I didn't have enough time to do anything really.
Yeah.
And both appointments were in the Eastern waterfront area. And I just took a walk around, grabbed a cup of coffee and took a walk around. I felt like I was in a strange city.
It's like the Boston Seaport, right?
Yeah. And I'm looking at buildings and thinking, well, yeah, I was involved in that, and I knew about this, but it was a revelation just walking around.
Yeah.
And again, I felt like a visitor in my own city.
So
much has happened so fast in that neighborhood.
We had a lot of criticism when we did our deal for that building. People say that's a ridiculous square foot cost. You're gonna spike the market. But when I look around at sort of the level of finish that we have, right, the office that we have could be anywhere, nice glassy finish. And then I look around at some of the other deals that have happened subsequently and what their square foot price is. I say, well, I'm like probably below average for this neighborhood. It was a heck of a deal. And so what I say is, this is backing up to your original question, which was, what are the opportunity, what are the pitfalls? The opportunity is to think big and be competitive anywhere, but the pitfall is to think too small. And I think if we can't imagine ourselves with the same level of finish, quality, peer group, employee in this place, the pitfall is that if we imagine ourselves to be small, then we will be small. And so I'm pretty excited about the trajectory here because it doesn't take a lot of imagination at this point to see what's happening there.
Any predictions or hopes or warnings that you see coming for your industry or Greater Portland or the state of Maine?
Yeah, so the industry is easy. There's going to be a lot of data consumed, and we're going to be there building it. When I think about the industry in the context of its place, I'm also pretty bullish on Portland. I think this level of development will continue, and I think what'll be important for us, and this is sort of drifting towards warning, is that we balance our approach to smart development and think about what are the challenges that we face, have real talk about the challenges we face, like affordable housing and traffic and those things, without going to the dark side of thinking that it's a polar world. Either, have a company be welcome here and have its workers be able to, have good housing and have accessibility, or livability and walkability and social fairness. I think we can have both of those things, and my hope is that, rather than having dueling referendums in the years to come, that we'll have good elected representatives that can really delve into these difficult, tough issues and come up with balanced solutions that will have the city and Maine writ large be sort of a workable place socially and from a quality of life standpoint, and also be a welcoming place for people to go and get the best jobs or grow the best business.
Thank you. You're a success story, your company's a success story, and you made it happen here in Portland, Maine. So we appreciate that. If you'd like to learn more about the Boulos Company, please be sure to visit us at boulos.com. That's BOULOS.com. You can find us on Facebook and LinkedIn, or on Instagram and Twitter. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit the subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening, and you'll be the first to know about new episodes of the Boulos Beat. Lastly, if you want to know the secret to owning real estate, it's pretty simple. As my partner Greg Boulos would say, just outlive your mortgage and you'll be fine. And treat your tenants well. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us
Thanks,
on
Tony.
the Boulos Beat.